know you're all waiting for Mrs. Roosevelt, and what I'd like to do with these next few minutes while we're waiting for her is tell you a little bit about the Roosevelt Reform Democrats, how we were formed, what we now stand for, what we look to in the future. It was just about a year ago that a group of people, myself included, got together to talk over the idea of forming a Reform Democratic Club in the 2nd Assembly District. Now, this was before the very loud primary battle of last summer when Mayor Wagner ran in the Democratic primary. As a matter of fact, it was before most people in Brooklyn had much idea of what the reform movement was about at all. As a matter of fact, we, who formed the Roosevelt Reform Democrats, were rather new in politics ourselves, and even we knew very little about the reform movement. We knew that Mrs. Roosevelt and Governor Lehman and Mr. Finletter were active in it. We knew something about the excitement that was going on in Manhattan related to Mr. DeSapio. But other than that, we really knew, well, not very much. We did know that the regular Democratic organizations in our districts for years had failed to do the job with which it was charged. It has failed to lead in alerting the people of this district to important national affairs. It has failed to lead in statewide issues. It has failed to lead in citywide issues. And it has fallen down miserably in leading the way to progress on the local level, including our problems in schools, in transportation, public facilities, services, and all the rest. Now, we knew the reason why the regular organization behaved that way. Basically, it was a question of bossism, because just a few people in the regular organization made all the decisions, because the interests of the rank and file Democrats simply were never considered in this decision-making process, because the only concern of the regular organization leaders in the 2nd AD was retention of their own power and not the interests of the Democrats in the 2nd Assembly District. Well, that was a year ago. A few of us took a long look at this situation, and we decided the time for talking had ended. We decided that it was time to do something about it. Well, we did something. We formed the Roosevelt Reform Democrats, and we joined with the citywide reform forces led by Mrs. Roosevelt and Governor Lehman. And we're trying to change the boss-dominated structure of the Democratic Party in this district. Now, it hasn't been easy. People don't join our club because they want a job. And people don't join our club simply because they want to advance their own personal careers. The members of our club, now believe it or not, are in it because they want to do something about improving the Democratic Party in this district. They want to make it genuinely responsive to the members of the Democratic Party in this district. Well, a year has passed. We have a solid, enthusiastic organization, and we're moving. We're moving into our first primary battle, and believe me, the odds are against us. But that's all right. We have 3 outstanding candidates in Ted Resnick, who's running for leader, and Ruth Kaplan, who's running for co-leader, and in Ken Rubenstein, who's running for assembly. We have the support of such people like Mrs. Roosevelt and dozens of other prominent people who have made all kinds of personal sacrifices to help build the reform movement and the Democratic Party. I hope with all my heart, sincerely, that those of you who go to the polls in the Democratic primary come September 7th will vote the straight reform ticket in the second AD. That's Ted Resnick for leader, Ruth Kaplan for co-leader, and Ken Rubenstein for assembly. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard the names of our candidates. Now you're going to meet them. Our candidate for district leader, male, young man who's been a resident of this district for many years. He's an engineer, he's married, and he has two sons, two young sons. He's a graduate from Madison High School and of Brooklyn College. He's one of the founders of our organization, the Roosevelt Reform Democrats. He's been a member of the executive board since its inception. He's a member of many leading civic organizations, including the ACLU and several others. It's with great pleasure that I give you our candidate for district leader, Mr. Ted Resnick.
Thank you. The other day, my older son asked my wife about having another baby. My wife asked him what his preference was. I don't need that strap. The other day, my older son asked my wife about having a new baby. And my wife asked him what his preferences were, and he said, well, we'll just have to take what we get. But in the 2nd Assembly District, we do not intend to take what we get. We've been taking for a long time. This is why a group of us last year decided to form a reform club here. For the first time in its history, this community has a reform club and a complete slate of candidates dedicated to the principles of reform. A slate of candidates not only from your local reform club, but one that is affiliated with the citywide reform movement founded by Eleanor Roosevelt, Senator Herbert Lehman, and Thomas K. Finletter. What are the aims of reform? To begin with, my purpose in running is to effect the changes so sorely needed in our party machinery. Candidates in this district are chosen by a boss, by a leader, if you can call him that, and his ruling circle, his cronies. Those are the ones who are picking your candidates in this district. Money is more important than qualifications for candidacy. I tell you, I am not a rich man, but at least I was chosen by majority vote of our Reform Democratic Club, and I intend to make a tough race in this district. Make no mistake about that. Our regular leader holds a job of county clerk. By what means does this man qualify for this job? He merely appointed himself. That's why he's county clerk. As a reform candidate, I am prohibited from accepting any form of patronage and would never. Is there any form of democracy in the regular organization? Of course not. We have secret ballots. People are free to vote for who they please. Candidates are nominated from the floor at general membership meetings, not in closed rooms. Everyone is free to speak. Everyone's free to nominate.
Our club officers are given very strong constitutional restrictions so that the membership remains firmly in charge of our organization. Club officers as well are chosen by secret ballot. And what's more, an elected official cannot hold office in this club. And let me remind you now that I have resigned my office in this club, and so has my running mate Ken Rubenstein. Our executive committee meetings, as well as all our general membership meetings, are open to all. Our organization, as many of you know, recently circulated petitions for Medicare. We've been out in the community working for worthwhile causes. What has the regular organization been doing for you? And many of you know we've circulated public opinion surveys, and we're compiling those now, and we'll soon have results. We're fighting for the day when proxy voting will disappear from the Kings County Committee, where the delegates will truly represent the people. In New York State, one of the most enlightened states in the Union, how do you think our candidates for senator and governor are chosen? By a crony-picked group that's sent up to Albany or whatever other city they pick in this state, instructed delegates, and these are the people who pick your senator and governor. Why not, like most of the other states, have a direct primary where the people in the community can pick their candidates for senator and governor? Now, in this community, in addition to the regulars, we have a regular assemblyman who now claims he too is a reformer. And how is he showing this? He has thrown himself into the race, and he's running for both leader and assemblyman, the two highest offices in this community. And who chose him? Not an organization, not a free vote. No. He decided himself that he was the best man, and of course he was the man to run. Who's behind him? The same as the regular organization. Regular organization captains are coming with him. I remind you, friends, that this is the only reform club in this district. We will fight until we do win, and we do need your support. And I thank you all for being here tonight, and I hope you will support us in September. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, one of the candidates that we run in any primary election has to be a woman. And we are very fortunate in running as our candidate for the female co-leader, a woman who has been active in this district for many, many years. A woman who is well known to many of you for her activities. She's a past president of the Parents Association of Cunningham Junior High School. She has taken part in the Mother's March on Polio, the Heart Fund, Federation of Jewish Philanthropies. She's an active member of the B'nai B'rith, the Brighton chapter, an active member of the Neptune Temple, the Pythian Sisterhood, and the Ocean Parkway Jewish Center. She's also an active member of the Reform Democratic organization, the Roosevelt Reform Democrats. It's with great pleasure that I present our candidate for co-leader, Mrs. Ruth Kaplan.
Mr. Chairman, candidates, ladies and gentlemen, I am grateful to the Roosevelt Lehman Stimulator Committee for affording me this opportunity of seeking the endorsement of this committee as candidate for District Leader Female, known to most of you as co-leader, grants to me this privilege. I cannot at this time, much as I should like to, detail all of the vital issues of this campaign. However, I would like to talk to you about the role of women in politics. And I see that the preponderance of our guests are comprised of women, and this makes me very, very proud. I'm not stopping for lack of words. I just like to capture the whole audience because you're all very important to me. Until the year of 1920, women were second-class citizens. Their place was strictly in the home. Their conversation was limited to the mundane affairs of home and children. Then, through the valiant efforts of the suffragettes, they succeeded in obtaining a constitutional amendment that gave to the women of our country the right of giving voice at the ballot box. From that day on, the women failed to utilize the great strength of numbers From that day on, the women failed to utilize the great strength of numbers that rightfully belong to us. We failed to actively participate in politics and thus remained only a still, small voice at the ballot box. By and large, we have shied away from politics as an area of disrepute, and if it has become an area of abuse, instead of an area of respect and accomplishment, it is indeed a paradox in a republic governed by the governed. George Bernard Shaw said that democracy is a device that ensures that we shall get no better than we deserve in government. Now, upon whose shoulders does the blame fall? Whose fault is it that the honor of politics and good government are empty phrases? I say it is the fault of the voter, and more specifically, the woman who fails to exercise her right to vote and to raise her voice loudly and clearly for the principles she believes in. I would like to quote an article which was taken from a well-known New York newspaper dated June 24th, 1960, which is yesterday, 40 years after obtaining suffrage. Quote, in spite of all the talk recently of giving women equal status with the men on all levels of the political ladder, recent experiences point to no change in the immediate future in their relative positions with the male political species. During the past week, 3 Brooklyn co-leaders and as many more over the line in Queens complained that when they attempted to express themselves on party policy, they were brought up short by curt orders from the male leaders to sit down and listen, but don't talk. We have a voice, one co-leader said sardonically, but it is impossible for us to be heard with a gag in our mouths. I ask you, is this not a sad commentary on the status of women in the political scene? It is time now that we, the women, actively engage in the work of elevating the name of politics and securing for our families the type of good government that we are entitled to have. Let me remind you, the candidate is only the instrument of the constituency. He cannot do your bidding if he is not elected. Remember this. As a chain is only as strong as its weakest link, so also is a candidate only as strong as his weakest worker. I urge you to help us to help you. Let not your voices be stilled. Let not your votes be wasted. Let not another 40 years elapse into a vacuum. Now is the time to speak out and vote for the reform candidates who desire to fulfill your mandate. Theodore Resnick, Ruth Kaplan, and Ken Rubenstein. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, not everybody who's a good person and a good worker and has your interest at heart is also a strong speaker with a loud voice. It's necessary that we keep our voices as low as possible so that we don't have to turn the microphone up and listen to ourselves in feedback. I'd like to introduce our third candidate. This young man is running for state assemblyman. Our candidate is an attorney who's been active in politics and in civic affairs for over 10 years. He's a graduate of Brooklyn College and of Columbia Law School. He's the president, or the former president, of the Roosevelt Reform Democrats. He's a member of the New York County Trial Lawyers Association, American Civil Liberties Union, Knights of Pythias, B'nai B'rith, Masons, Congregation of Havim, and the Brooklyn College Alumni Association. He has recently become the father of a boy. I think he's only been a father for about a week and he hasn't awakened yet. It's with great pleasure that I present our candidate for State Assembly, Mr. Kenneth Rubenstein.
After this round of applause, I'm not so sure whether I should make a speech. Perhaps I'm better off just sitting down and thank you for your applause. I am proud of being a father, but I'm not going to ask you to vote for me on that basis. You've heard from the president of our club, from the candidates for district leader male and for district leader female. I think they have tried to tell you in striking and dramatic terms the tremendous and vital difference between the regular Democratic organization and the reform clubs. But many of you may be wondering, what difference does it make to me?
What difference does it make to you indeed whether one man picks your candidates or whether a group of people acting democratically select their candidates? What difference does it make whether every individual has the right and indeed exercises that right to discuss issues, to debate issues, and to vote as he or she sees fit? What difference indeed does that make to each and every one of you who have not been active or very interested in politics at all? And looking at the audience, I noticed that perhaps the two largest groups of people we have here tonight are our senior citizens and our very young. I think that it makes this difference. In a democratic society, and I think we have one, perhaps not completely, but I think basically the principles that we live by, or at least that we dream by, are democratic in origin. I think it's extremely important to uphold these principles. Otherwise, the very fabric of our society, our political society, may not survive. But let me approach this a little bit differently. The importance of how your democratic organization is run locally is this. At the present time, it is your district leader, alone or in concert with a few other individuals, who selects your candidates for public office. He is the man who selects your candidate for the state assembly, and in cooperation with another district leader for the state senate, in cooperation with several district leaders for Congress, and eventually in cooperation with the district leaders throughout the state, your candidate for governor and for the United States Senate are selected then by one or by a handful of men. Obviously, the quality of your public servants depends very largely on what your district leader has to say. Frankly, I don't think we can afford to continue with this kind of system. I don't think I have to elaborate on the difficulties of our times, nor do I have to elaborate on the dangers of our times today to demonstrate to all of you the imperative necessity of selecting outstanding men for public office, whether they be your state assemblymen, your state senators, your governor, or your United States senators. All of you will agree, I'm sure, that the men who represent you should be of the highest caliber, of complete integrity, people who at all times you can look up to and respect. I don't think we have men of that type in government today. I'm not suggesting that we don't have a few, but by and large, I think most of the men that represent us are mediocre. I think most of the men who represent us think first, or at least sometimes, and in some instances, more frequently than not, think of themselves first and of you secondly. I think that must stop. And that's where you come in. That's where you're important. We stand here, just a few people. You've never met us before. You don't know very much about us. I think we have told you a number of things that you obviously know are true. But in terms of making changes, it's really up to you. So many of us complain about bad government. So many of us turn our heads when we talk about politicians or hear the name politics. But there's nothing wrong, there's nothing dirty about the word politics. Certainly, there shouldn't be anything dirty about the word politics or about the word politicians. The word politics deals with the art of government and the art of governing. And I think all of us would agree that in selecting representatives of the people, they should be men of tremendous ability, men of great caliber. And if there is a gap between what candidates should be and what they are, I think it's the fault of the people. Now, I think it's also important for everyone to realize that there is a tremendous difference in the concept and in terms of the responsibilities that a regular organization undertakes and the responsibilities that a reform organization undertakes. I have never known a regular organization to concern itself with community problems. Usually, if a local democratic organization does anything, it does favors. If you have a problem, at least years ago, if you wanted a ticket fixed, you would think of going down to see the district leader. If you wanted a jury notice fixed, you would think of going down to the district leader. These are favors. We, on the other hand, as a Reform Club, believe that it is our responsibility, and I say our responsibility, to render service, not favors, but service to the community. And I think this is a striking difference, then, between a regular organization and a Reform Club. Now, I don't want you to take what I have to say just on words alone, just on broad generalization. I want to tell you specifically some of the things that we have done in and for the community since we have been in existence. In the last few months, we have formed a rent clinic. Anybody who wants advice on rent problems is free to come down to our club and ask for our advice. This isn't a favor that we render. This is a service that we feel a great obligation to perform to this community. We thank you for coming to us and asking us for your assistance. We don't expect you to thank us. We have felt for some time, based on a survey that we conducted, that Medicare to the aged is a very important bill to the people in this community as well as throughout the country. We just didn't get up tonight and say to you that we think this is important and that we're in favor of it, but we went out weekend after weekend with petitions asking people to indicate their support for this most important measure. And we were successful in collecting several thousand signatures, which were presented to President Kennedy at the Medicare rally held a month ago. We have recently completed a survey in the community. The purpose of this survey was to find out what are the issues that most concern the people in this community. What are the problems that most concern the people in this community? And based on the returns that we have, we now know a little bit more about community problems. We are now in a little better position to go out and help the community. So I ask you to bear this in mind. The very important difference between a regular organization and a reform organization. That we believe it is our responsibility to render service to this community. And that we believe that it is the responsibility of every local club, whether it be Democratic or Republican for that matter, to render service to the people who live in the community. We don't expect thanks. We will thank you for coming to us and letting us help you.
I'd like to speak very briefly on myself as a candidate for the State Assembly. I think that most of you, because of the tremendous national and international problems that we face today, are primarily concerned with national and international affairs rather than with the affairs on the state level. But at the same time, I'm sure all of you realize and would agree that there are tremendous problems that this state faces. Some of the problems, it may be true, aren't faced by you particularly. This is a pretty good area. By and large, we have middle-income people. But I think in terms, again, of the responsibility of representatives, of the responsibility of those who seek your support for public office, it is absolutely necessary that they concern themselves not only with the problems of the people within their own assembly district, but also with the problems of this great state. The first thing I want to tell you, and this may shock you, is that the state legislature needs a complete overhauling. I think most of you would be amazed to know that the State Assembly is in session perhaps 30 days out of the year. For these 30 days, your assemblymen and state senators are compensated at the rate of $10,000 a year plus $2,500 in expenses. Now, I'm not suggesting that public servants should not be well compensated. What I am suggesting is that they earn their money. I would propose to you that instead of the state legislature meeting 3 days for 3 months during the year, that there be a split legislative session, that they be in session 6 or 7 months out of the year, so that they can continually survey the problems of the state, and so that they have the opportunity to take considered and deliberate action in solving the many problems we have. It may strike you as surprising that unlike the federal Congress, in the State Assembly, there's no such thing as a legislative record. The remarks that people make in the Senate are not taken down. The people, in effect, have very little way of judging the intentions and the remarks made by their representatives. On very few important public issues are there public hearings. I think all of you will readily agree that when you have an important public issue, before anyone, and most particularly a state legislator, can make an intelligent judgment on the wisdom of a particular bill, he should have the opportunity of listening to the views of those most informed, of those experts within a given field. That committee hearings should be held regularly, and they're not. That bills should be reported out of committees, and they're not. And I would suggest in this area that where 1/3 of a committee, or 1/3 of either house, wants a bill to be reported onto the floor of the Assembly, that it should be done. At this point, there are thousands of bills that are tied up in committee, thousands of meritorious bills that never get a hearing on the floor of the Assembly, and consequently never get a hearing in public. This is wrong. This ought to be corrected. Now, there are dozens of different procedural reforms that must be effected for the State Assembly and for the State Senate to operate correctly and effectively. I'd just like to mention that in terms of substantive issues, there is a great deal to be done in this state. I don't know how many of you are aware of the fact that just this past year, a law was enacted which provides that children 12 years of age may work 12 hours a day in harvesting. I think that's a disgraceful law. And yet I'm sure that most of the people within the state don't even know of its existence. This is something that should be eradicated from the books. In the areas of education, and I think, again, this represents a tremendous difference between a reform candidate and a regular candidate. A reform candidate not only votes right in his community, and ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure that all of you realize that the easiest thing for your assemblyman or your state senator to do is to vote the way he thinks you would like him to vote. That way, when he comes to you, campaigning and electioneering, and tells you, well, I voted in favor of this bill, I voted in favor of that bill, well, you say to yourself, he did a wonderful job. Well, I want you to know that voting is the smallest part of an assemblyman's job. The biggest part of his job is becoming well-informed on the issues and then fighting and working for the very things that he believes in. This is so important, and this represents such a vital departure between your so-called liberal legislators and the reform candidates. It's the reform candidates who not only vote right, but think right and work right. And I'd just like to mention two more issues in this connection. Unlike your present assemblyman who voted against the creation of a charter revision commission for political reasons, I would have voted for it. I think it's clear to all of us that charter revision was a very important issue last year, that the only reason it was defeated in the state assembly and in the state assembly and in the state senate was because your political bosses, and I don't mean that in a trite sense, I mean your political bosses, the chairman of your county committee throughout the 5 counties of New York, lined up in opposition to Mayor Wagner. And they lined up in I don't mind they're lined up in opposition to Mayor Wagner, but what I do mind is when they sacrifice the best interests of the public. This was needed legislation, and there was no reason to sacrifice the interests of the public simply because there was a quarrel and a fight between your party bosses and the mayor of this city. Another issue that I think was extremely important last year dealt with the sale of property on the East River to Con Edison. Previously, your assemblyman stated that he was in favor of this sale. He was absent last year when the vote was taken. I would have voted differently. I would have voted against what I considered to have been a wrongful giveaway. The property that was sold was to be used to build 900 units of middle-income housing on vacant land. Nobody was going to be displaced. New apartments were going to be created, and God knows we need a lot of middle-income housing. There are many, many other issues that I could discuss with you, because I don't want to monopolize the time of the meeting. In summation, what I'd like to say to you is this. If you find fault with those who govern you, you should also find fault with yourself. The people who represent you were elected by you. You can't look down on politicians unless you recognize at the same time that you yourselves have made a mistake, either because you voted wrongly, or because you didn't vote at all, or because you didn't take the time to concern yourself with the important issues of the day. I'm not only going to ask you to vote for us, I'm going to ask you to work with us. I'm going to ask you to join with us in our efforts to make a change in government. And when I ask you to do this, I'm not asking you to do it simply on what I've told you. I want you to measure my words, as well as the words of the other candidates, against what we ourselves do within our own club. If you find that we haven't kept faith with you in terms of what we have pledged, then of course, do not vote for us. But I ask you to please give us the opportunity and to give yourselves the opportunity of improving the present government. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mrs. Roosevelt has arrived. I'd like to introduce, please sit down quickly. Ladies and gentlemen, we have with us a man who has been active in reform politics for many years. The husband of our co-leader candidate, Mr. George Chaplin.
You know, I'd like to have you stand up as Mrs. Roosevelt walks in. I know how thrilling it must be for you to see this lovely lady come to visit with us tonight. All I will take will be approximately 30 seconds of your time, and then you will be able to listen to her. In the dark days of 1933, there came to the White House a man who put this country on its feet, a man who gave the people of our nation the courage to look forward, our great President Franklin D. Roosevelt. But another wonderful thing about Franklin D. Roosevelt was that he brought with him to the White House the lady who since then and up to this day is the first lady of the world. And I am proud to introduce her tonight, as I have before, Mrs. Eleanor Roosevelt.
Ladies and gentlemen, I come tonight to talk to you about your candidate for the Assembly, Ms. Ken Rubenstein, and the election also of your district leader. I think that the reform movement has had one great advantage. It is bringing to the people of our area a feeling that they themselves have a responsibility to do a job and elect people that they feel will be really their representatives. To do a job, you have to be members of your organization. You have to work. You have to know what are the things you want your representatives to do. I couldn't help thinking when, for a moment, your chairman spoke of my husband and that he had pulled us through a serious time in our history. Most of the young people here have entirely forgotten what the situation was in 32. But some of you are old enough to remember how serious the Depression really was. How discouraged a great many people were. How they felt that they didn't know where to turn. And yet, my husband said at the time, I cannot do this job unless the people are with me. He always said that it was because the people were willing to work with him that we were successful in pulling ourselves out of the Depression, getting back our confidence in ourselves, getting back the feeling that we could meet our problems. Now, in a way, that's what the reform movement has done. We had reached a point where we had turned over our government very largely to a few professionals. We were saying the problems are too difficult, we don't understand them. Why do we have to take the responsibility of thinking about who should be elected and who should be appointed and what we should do about these problems? We will leave it to a few people. That really means, of course, that you abdicate your right. You're no longer free. You're not doing things of your own volition and through your own effort. And the professionals, sensing their power, became more and more anxious to keep it in a few hands, where they knew they could control and get what they wanted. This is a dangerous thing. Strange to say, this is accepting the same theory that you would if your government was the kind of government where all you had to do was to obey a few people at the top. Then you could cheerfully say, it's their responsibility, I don't have to bother. All I have to do is do what I'm told. Now, I know it's hard to think ahead and plan. I'm going to register
and I'm going to vote in the next primary. And I'm going to see that all my friends and relatives not only register and vote, but know what the issues are, and that we are voting in the way that we have decided after discussion is going to be of use to us. We want a representation where we are allowed to come in and be a part of the organization and vote democratically and really know what our representatives are going to work for. And we want representatives who will always appear when our interests are being discussed, and who will try and get across our ideas on the subject. We don't want the kind of representatives who sometimes have quite a fair voting record because they've done what they were told, but they themselves had no conviction. They didn't consult with the people in their district and say, what do you really want? Now, most of us want, basically, better housing, better schools, and better recreation for our children. And we know that if we had those things, the juvenile delinquency problem would not be what it is today. We want the basic things that make a difference for our neighborhood, for our children, for the future of our country. We want the children who have talent, who have intelligence, to be able to go on and get the education that will mean they have a better opportunity, not only to develop for what it will mean to them, but for what it will mean to their country, to have their brains at work in the country. We live in a time where we need the very best that any of us can produce. That means we have to try to develop all of our capacity. And it's not only the men and the women. We want to tell our young people that we are living in a period when all of us have a responsibility to do the best that we can possibly do. And our children are preparing for their responsibility so that they must be developing the best of their capacity. This is no time for older people to think that any group among us does not feel that they have a responsibility for their country. Because if we allow our children to think that they are not important, that they don't have a job to do, they are not going to do the best that they know how. They are not going to feel responsible for the growth of our country in this period. So what I come to you tonight to say is that I hope you will realize that this is no time to be apathetic. This is no time to say, let somebody else take my responsibility. This is no time to think that your vote doesn't count. Your representative, if he can say, in my district, my people are studying the problems and they will vote on election day. They will vote in the primary. Oh, he will get so much more attention the higher up you go. Because every elected official knows that it is the votes of the people that he has to conquer. And the things we really need can't be given us by private organizations or individuals. They have to come through our government. Now we know that we live in difficult times, but we know too that we are a very strong country. But a country is only as strong as its individual citizens. That's why we have a responsibility, each and every one of us, to give the best that we have to give to our citizenship. And I think the reform movement is trying to bring home to every individual that this is an individual responsibility. I can only say to you that I hope you will elect your candidates in the primary. I hope you will then follow your candidates and see that they really do a job of representing you. It's a remarkable thing how much better a representative can be if he knows that he has people at home who are going to ask him about what he is doing. I learned that way back in Washington in the days of the Depression. We used to have quite a number of exhibitions, and I used to go because my husband would say to me, there's that WPA art exhibit. I wish you'd go and see what the artists are getting a chance to do. There's that exhibit in the Department of Agriculture of possible arts and crafts that can be developed on the farm. I wish you'd go and see and tell me. If it's good, I'll try to get time some evening and we'll go over and look at it together. Well, I used to find that among the representatives from the House and the Senate, I rarely found a representative from New York State. But there was one senator that I met everywhere I went. So one night at dinner I said to him, how does it happen that I meet you wherever I go to look at the things that we're trying to do? And he said, oh, because when I get home, when I walk down the street of the Capitol in my state, my very first person who meets me will say, oh, Mr. Senator, did you see that exhibition in Washington? Tell us about it. What did you find that was useful? And so he said, of course I have to go, because if I wasn't able to answer, they would think I was no use as a senator. So you see, it really isn't just electing someone. It's being alive to the things you want to know and the things you want to have done, and following through, and seeing to it that your representatives really represent you, and really bring back to you the things you want to know, that they appear here in the city when there are things being discussed in different bodies that affect your lives. Because it's important that we show the world how well democracy really can improve the lives of the people of the country. So tonight, I hope you will elect your reform candidate. I hope you will go on helping them to do a good job. And I wish for you, as I wish for all of us in this country, the satisfaction of feeling that we're giving the best we have to our country in a time when the world is a troubled world, and when we have to give leadership to a great part of the world and win even more people to our beliefs in the values of democracy. Thank you.